There is a lot of discussion about if the Bite of 87 is what is depicted in Five Nights at Freddy's 4. However, there is definite evidence proving that it cannot be, and this evidence is sitting right in front of all of our eyes. It comes in the form of Phone Guy literally, albeit indirectly, telling us so. In the entire series, we've only heard of the Bite of 87 being referenced once in the first phone call of the first game, Five Nights at Freddy's, and in it is stated as thus.
They used to be allowed to walk around during the day, too. But then there was the Bite of 87. Yeah. It's amazing that the human body can live without the frontal lobe, you know?
When people hear this call, a lot of things stick out to people. The frontal lobe being bitten off. The Bite of 87, this iconic name that probably isn't as important as people want to make it out to be. But what a lot of people don't tend to notice is the fact that he brings up that the animatronics were allowed to roam around during the day. In Five Nights at Freddy's 1, these animatronics are no longer allowed to because of an event that occurred in the past. The Bite of 87 caused these animatronics to no longer be able to walk around during the day. Here enters Five Nights at Freddy's 2 in their phone calls. In Night 4 of Five Nights at Freddy's 2, the phone guy tells us a bit more information related to this topic, albeit indirectly, in the same way that the first night of the first game told us this information.
Just as a side note though, try to avoid eye contact with any of the animatronics inside if you can. Someone may have tampered with their facial recognition systems, we're not sure. But the characters have been acting very unusual, almost aggressive toward the staff. They interact with the kids just fine, but when they encounter an adult, they just stare. Anyway, hang tight, it'll all pass. Good night.
Listen carefully to how he phrases that statement. He says that when they encounter adults, they just stare. Listen again.
They interact with the kids just fine, but when they encounter an adult, they just stare.
At this point in the series, we have an understanding that these animatronics, at least at some point in history, were made to walk around and interact with people throughout the day. Now, for him to say that when they encounter an adult, they just stare, it only would make sense for that to be an occurrence if those animatronics were still roaming around, which places this event before the Bite of 87 were to happen. Now, I'm still sure some of you out there will sit here and still think, but guys, Fredbear bit that kid. This could have taken place at the same time as Five Nights at Freddy's 2. Well, we have another phone call from Phone Guy that pretty much debunks that entirely. In Five Nights at Freddy's 3, we have several recorded messages from Phone Guy that had to have taken place before Five Nights at Freddy's 2. They discuss a lot of the history, use, and decommissioning of the Springlock animatronic costumes. And in Night 4, we hear a call describing the event that decommissioned these.
Hello. There's been a slight change of company policy concerning use of the suit. Don't. After learning of an unfortunate incident at the sister location involving multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures, the company has deemed the suit temporarily unfit for employees. Safety is top priority at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, which is why the classic suits are being retired to an appropriate location while being looked at by our technicians.
One thing that we don't see in Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is any of the Springlock animatronic characters. We don't see Spring Bonnie, and we don't see Fredbear at all. Now, the question is why? If we listen to this last phone call, it seems to be because they were taken out of use for an accident that happened of some sort at a previous location. But if Five Nights at Freddy's 4 takes place after or during Five Nights at Freddy's 2, then there's no way that that could be true. Furthermore, I think that the events of Five Nights at Freddy's 4 actually suggest that this game, this pizzeria that we see, isn't Fredbear's Family Diner. It isn't some place that takes place at the same time as Five Nights at Freddy's 2, but instead an early sister location for one of the Five Nights at Freddy's pizzerias. A sister location in which a Springlock failure occurred. This failure, mind you, cannot be one in which a performer dies. And the phone call from Five Nights at Freddy's 3, taking place on Night 3, confirms this to be the case.
Try not to nudge or press against any of the spring locks inside the suit. Do not touch the spring locks at any time. Do not breathe on the spring locks, as moisture may loosen them and cause them to break loose. In the case that the spring locks come loose while you are wearing a suit, please try to maneuver away from populated areas before bleeding out, as to not ruin the customer experience.
The first time many of us heard this phone call, what we took away from it was this bizarre kind of indirect method of telling the player how dangerous these Springlock costumes were. And to an extent, I think that was the intention. But on the side intention, I think that this was setting up something else. Now, if a performer at some point in this history were to have had this event happen to them where they breathed on the Springlocks too long or got them too moist with their breath, then it seems, based on this phone call, that the company would be able to handle that. This phone call acts as preparation. This phone call is a precaution to anybody who is working in this role. They understand the dangers. They know that if they do this job, they're basically risking their lives. This is something that is already known to be dangerous to employees. So why would Phone Guy tell these employees in the call from night 4 that whatever happened was making it any more dangerous to an employee? The phone call we get in night 3 basically establishes that the thing can kill you. But what it doesn't establish is what these suits can do to someone else. Because not only does Phone Guy debunk the idea that Five Nights at Freddy's 4 depicts the bite of 87, he instead further reinforces the idea that perhaps this event, this child being bitten by this Fredbear, was not the bite of 87, and instead this event that happened back in the early past, the old times of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, when they still had more characters than it seems like they do now. This is back when they had all the toy animatronics, all the original animatronics, and all the classic animatronics, Fredbear and Spring Bunny, all coexisting in these pizzerias all at the same time, albeit possibly at different times. Maybe only in toy form. Maybe they switched around. We don't know. We haven't seen. But what we do know is that Five Nights at Freddy's 4, these minigames we see cannot take place in 1987. Or at least not in the time in which we see it. Because in 1987, Fredbear was no longer there. Fredbear was not the culprit of the bite of 87, in which he bit off the frontal lobe of some child. Instead, Fredbear seemed to be a Springlock animatronic costume that had a malfunction in which a child died, being crushed in his head, possibly living a little bit longer, making it to the hospital, in which we hear single flatlining noise. But this later laying down the foundation for a company-wide banning. A company-wide, we should take all these out, stick them into the safe rooms, and have our specialists look at them. This leading to all the future establishment no longer having their Springlock classic costume of Fredbear or Spring Bonnie. Phone Guy leaves us enough information to understand that even without having a definite date, barring the Fredbear and Friends 1983 Easter egg in Five Nights at Freddy's 4, barring all these hints that could possibly say that Five Nights at Freddy's 4 could already not take place in 1987, he has already planted enough information to ensure to us that Five Nights at Freddy's 4 could not be the bite of 87. So instead of trying to justify and find more reasons to say that Five Nights at Freddy's 4 is the bite of 87, instead we could sit all together and talk about all the other things we don't know. Because when it comes down to it, the bite of 87 was never really that important. The bite of 87 wasn't something that needed to be this huge mystery. Instead, the bite of 87 was merely something that demonstrated how dangerous these characters could be. That at one point, they attacked an innocent child. Not, I wonder who it is, oh, it has to be this guy, it has to be them. No, it wasn't this weird murder mystery people make it out to be. It was just something that laid out the foundation for how scary these characters are supposed to be. And I hope that we get more answers to the other questions, the more important questions, the more open-ended questions. Who's Shadow Freddy? Who is Shadow Bonnie? Where are all these things coming from? What do these things mean? Instead of asking a question that was given one time as a throwaway statement. One phone call in which Phone Guy says, we can't let them walk around anymore ever since the bite of 87. We already know everything we need to know.